Welcome, one and all, to yet another episode of WhickTV. And gang, we have a show for you today. But before we get into the show, briefly, as most of you know, who follow me, who watch me, I am going to TwitchCon this year. But my living arrangements, the Airbnb I was staying at, canceled. And so now I have to find new living arrangements. So if you happen to live in the Las Vegas area, have a couch that I could crash on or something, please reach out. And I would be more than happy to risk being stabbed in my sleep by a stranger in order to still go to TwitchCon. So please, by all means, I'm a little stressed right now. Just a quick call to action before we get into the show proper. But that's not what we came here to talk about. No. We came to talk about religion, its role in modern society and in modern conflict, given the state of the world today. Is religion just a product of a bygone era that we should move past, or is it something that we've moved too far away from and need to reconnect with it? I've assembled a panel of illustrious guests today to talk about this topic and how it relates to our modern lives and also modern conflict. And with that, we're going to open it up by giving it to the person who finally gets to use his degree, Beckett. Go ahead.
Good evening. Okay, so I'll be brief. Yes, it still has a place. Frankly, it's something we can't really get rid of. Humans are pattern recognition animals that tell stories. We build basically a shared reality by doing that. If we don't have religion, we'll do it with politics. We'll do it with shared culture, creed, anything. Religion's a really big part of that. Some people are going to say things like, well, God doesn't exist, or, we can't fundamentally believe in things that we can't prove. But we do this with tons of things. We talk about the concepts as real, like fairness, justice, mercy. But these things are things that we sort of just agree are concepts and have shared meaning. Ultimately, religion can do a lot of damage, but so can other elements in our societies. But yeah, I look forward to hearing the opinions of everyone else.
Well, thanks for being here, and I'm sure we'll get into it as we go. Next up, Johnny Scarlett.
Can you?
Nope. You cut out a little bit.
I cut out a little bit? Okay.
Yeah, but I can hear you now.
Okay, cool. Hi. Hi, I'm Johnny. I am going to be speaking about this in terms of what we understand religion to be, both socially and as a discipline. I feel like those are aspects that can be secular entirely, but religion provides a space to talk about things that people can't prove, that people can't even often put into linguistic terms. And so I think that people will continue to have experiences that they cannot explain. We've had experiences that we can't explain throughout all of human history, and religion continues to be the space where we talk about that. That's it.
Okay, well, we'll get into it, I'm sure, during the open discussion. Thank you for being here. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Not Smith, but Kilo. I see you in my chat saying, why Smith here? Don't worry about it. It's not Smith. It's Kilo. Kilo, go ahead.
I like Smith, but honestly, I don't even really think we look that much alike. This is getting crazy at this point, but
I legit thought that. Sorry.
No, dude, it's fine. It's not. It wasn't just you. It's like people in chat. No, I mean my stance is pretty simple. When I think of the term religion, I think of organized religion. I think of a church. I think of an establishment. I think of an institution. I think of political context. I think of historical context. All of those things. And I think religion, from that standpoint, has probably overstayed its welcome. I think people should still be encouraged and welcome to feel spiritual and practice in private, whatever sort of belief about the unanswered questions humanity faces that they choose. But beyond that, I do think that we've have enough body of evidence to be able to say that this is doing sustained harm, and the good that religion brings to the world is easily replicated, probably in other areas at this point in humanity's trajectory. So that's my position.
Okay, well, thanks for being here, and we'll get into it as we go. Socked on left, you're up.
religion is not just a concept, not just a recognition of patterns. It is a recognition, in my view, of patterns which do not exist. It requires a belief in the supernatural, or in an afterlife, or in things which we cannot observe. So it's not simply pattern recognition. It's not the same thing as an innate human process. It is an institution built by people to maintain power for tens of thousands of years because they want to justify their rulership in some kind of divine justification. They want to say that they have a gift from the gods, and that's why they are ruling. And that's the reason it's stuck around. In contrast, as people have gotten more educated, as incomes have risen, the secularization thesis has held true. Countries have gotten less and less and less religious the more high income they are. The least religious countries on earth are the post-Soviet countries, the high-income countries of Europe, and the high-income countries of East Asia. And we're seeing the exact same thing happen in the United States. In the next 20 years, something like 50% of Americans will become unaffiliated or agnostic or atheist. And it's because of how high our education is, how high our incomes are. So in short, when you give people the tools to understand the world without the pattern recognition, the faulty pattern recognition of religion, they abandon it.
Okay, we'll see how that goes. And last but certainly not least, last minute addition to the panel though, Socrates, what's up?
Hey everybody, how we doing? Thanks for having me on, Wick. Really happy to see this panel. In America, we have an unbelievable amount of power wielded by a Christian right that is primarily heretical. So it believes things that are strictly against the teachings of their religion. If if they were true Christians, maybe we'd be having a different conversation. As it is, there's both magical thinking and a lot of bad things involved. That being said, there's a broader category that needs to be introduced, which is ideology. Religion is just one example of an ideology. American exceptionalism, nationalism, these are ideologies that have justified a lot of largely secular wars. So those need to be brought into the conversation as well.
Okay, and with that, we're going to open the floor up to discussion. If you have trouble getting your thoughts in, please raise your hand. And if I have questions during it, I will simply ask them. Again, I want to focus both on how it applies to our lives today and how it affects us both positively and negatively, and also how it's played a role in the conflicts of late, both with Russia and Ukraine, with the Russian Orthodox Church declaring Ukraine to be an enemy, etc., and that being used as a possible tool of the state, and also with the Palestinian and Israeli conflicts and how on both sides there are religious actors pushing that, and whether that's something that is simply unique to those religions or is just kind of something that's in religion inherently. And we'll talk about it. But yeah, go ahead. Floor's open.
So just starting, I think it's interesting that SDL's take is essentially the same as Anton LaVey's. Religion, is in a lot of ways a way to basically conglomerate power. Taking something and basically you're sharing, like LaVey's arguments were that if you worship a religion, you're not really worshiping a god or any concept, you're worshiping the person who brings that to you, and sharing an element of your power and truth with them. What I'd say is, when I say pattern recognition or anything else, I'm talking broadly about how humans are, but we do tell stories about who we are, what we believe to be true, and some of those are going to be shaky at any point. I'd ask, generally speaking, if we removed religion tomorrow, do you think it would reduce a significant amount of harm in the world? Or do you think that, other concepts have done that? Because it seems like things like European unity is the thing that's reduced war in Europe, not secularism.
SDL, are you a Satanist?
No. No, I mean, I guess to respond to that, I would just note that, most wars throughout history are fought for reasons of power, right? But a significant subset of those wars have also been motivated by religion. Even if it were only 1% of wars were motivated by religious thinking, that would still be uncountable many deaths, right? Our goal should be to try and reduce the number of ideologies, of belief systems, which could lead people to harm others for no sound reason, right?
Well, and you could probably isolate some certain conflicts throughout human history to specifically just religion, but to be clear, a lot of them are inextricably tied with like geopolitical factors as well.
I would agree with that.
Especially,
Yeah.
yeah. So if you you could say like these sets of wars are specifically just because of religion, but really like religion's death toll is probably pretty high when you consider the political motivations of like a power like the Roman Catholic Church, or whatever authority that had like religious precedence. What's that, Beckett?
See, it's interesting you say that, because it's like when we look at the Crusades, when we're looking at with the Crusade with Pope Innocent III, a lot of his concepts was wiping out, sending everyone through France to wipe out kind of conflicting religions to Catholicism. So, there's a lot of political elements there. You could say they're religious, but
Mhm.
his motivation seems definitely set in one way. And even
That's
with the
actually leading to a
Oh.
question that I have. What are some of the things? I outlined one thing. I went very briefly. I said one thing that is different from a religion to something that can be just social or civil, something secular. What are some of the things that you think define a religion? And then maybe speak in those terms. Something different from, okay, if you're going to talk about the geopolitical implications of fighting a war for a religion, are you talking about one religion or are you talking about another?
I think people fight wars. I don't. I think
Yeah,
religion is
exactly.
using it as an excuse, but I think
Exactly.
we
So
still have
what
the
is
war
the spot that religion fits
to
that
justify
is explicitly causing war to you?
I think this speaks to my perception of religion as being, when I use the term religion, I'm referring to the organized, establishment oriented nature of certain churches, or certain labels or what have you. I think what it does is it cultivates a few probably harmful things. One of them is sort of a psychological tribalism. So like an us versus them type of mentality. For instance, the establishment of certain religions that say there is only one true God, this is the God, whatever.
Mhm.
And there have been wars throughout human history that have been motivated by the desire to get people to worship their God. Now, there were also political motivations for those wars as well, obviously, land and resources and trade routes and things like that. But one
Mm.
of the big things I think is otherizing people who don't share the same view
But
as
a
you.
Yes,
question for
and
you, oh,
it,
go ahead.
just 1 second.
Yeah.
Something like a Sikh religion, like Sikhism, Sikhi rather. Something like Sikh is very, what's the word, perennialist. It believes that anyone in any way, shape, or form can worship God in general, the divine. It is not Abrahamic. It is not explicitly wishing for you to wish upon a certain God. And the Sikh religion is also not generally causing any physical conflict that is internationally wide.
I see where
So
you're going, but of the most
here-
prominent. I'm sorry, go ahead, Johnny.
So all I'm trying to build up to is, if you take away the things that you guys are talking about, take away religions that seem to have a very separatist, very violent, or exclusionary tendency, I still see a place for a religion in the world past those elements. Okay?
Sikhism is a
And what's gonna be this conversation is, it's gonna be about international conflicts and not really about the implications of human experience that constitute the origins of religion.
Sikhism is one of the newest, most prominent religions. That was the problem. So, having been
Is the problem?
introduced, well, is the problem with the comparison that you're drawing, or like the picture you're painting here? Just because
Hmm.
I think, like, give it enough time, because the Abrahamic religions have been around for a lot longer.
See,
Buddhism is
that's a
very, very
claim.
old.
That's a really interesting claim, that all religions eventually lead to conflict and eventually lead to separatism.
Oh
I
wait,
think-
so just to butt in for a second. So it could be two things, right? It could be a religion eventually becomes violent, or it's more recent, so it's a more modern religion. So it wasn't created at a time when as much of the world was unknown and therefore magical.
I was going to say, I do think and I don't know if anyone would dispute this fact. I do think humanity is obviously becoming more civilized and less violent over time.
Mhm.
So it's possible that religions that sprout up within recent decades or millennia or whatever would have a tendency to probably be less violent and less problematic. But you could also say, look at any religion in the entire history of human civilization or whatever, and they've all bred some form of conflict, some form of violence, or
Except
disagreement,
I
right?
actually,
I-
which we
I-
just
I would disagree with-
demonstrated.
One at a time.
Yeah,
Let's go
I
SDL, then
disagree.
let's go Beckett, and then we'll go Johnny.
I just wanted to say I would disagree with the claim that newer religions are, as a trend, less like violent or controlling. Like an easy example would be Jonestown, right, which was an incredibly controlling new religious movement that emerged in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and resulted in about like 900, 1,000 dead out of something like 3,000 worshippers in a mass self-deletion incident. And so I guess I would say I don't tend to think that. I tend to think it actually works the other way. It's that because religion is tied to power, because people use religion to justify their beliefs, they use it to justify their politics, that is how it will end up being used to divide people. That whenever a polity gets associated with a religion, whenever a country gets associated with a religion, it uses that as a tool of advancing its own interests. That's why, historically, polities always pursued like religious homogeneity, why they pursued such strict blasphemy laws, why they killed non-believers, as I believe Beckett was talking about with, I think, the Albigensian Crusade. And I think Beckett was next, so he might speak to that.
I'm actually,
And then,
I'm
of course,
gonna
you have-
completely
oh, yeah.
agree with. Sorry, just quickly. I actually want
No.
to really stand SDL. I agree with him. I think that fundamentally, like things, generally religions are adopted by a state. It's happened with Christianity. It happened with Buddhism. We sort of like a religion develops and a state goes, well, that works for us. And you can see little tidbits of that in Christianity, for example, like render unto Caesar is kind of weird. It's a weird phrase in the Bible at a weird point that's like, hey, be religious, but pay your taxes. And there are like theologians who are like, yeah, maybe this is put in to make it more compliant with the Roman state it was dealing with, and where you don't see that so much with Islam, which is much more of a religion that built a state. I think the thing is, when we're looking at kind of belief systems, let's like separate out from religion a little bit, but even capitalism, as much as I like capitalism, people talk about it in a way that is far and away from the ideology and Smith's work that built it. When people talk about market forces, they don't really believe in the market. Our leaders don't really believe in it. If our leaders were truly capitalist or truly understood it, they wouldn't bail out banks. They wouldn't give massive amounts of money to tech corporations. They'd let the market function.
Sure.
They don't do that.
So they're
But
capitalist heretics.
But
They're not true capitalists.
Yeah. But the same thing happens with a religion. When you read a scripture, a lot of people are going to ask, well, this seems pretty far away from where we're at with religion. Like the Bible versus what the Catholic, Orthodox, and Anglican and evangelical churches have done seems disparate. That's also true of Buddhism. That's true of like multiple religions. So yeah, I think my contention with SDL is I don't see, unless you're of the point where we need to get rid of religion because it's not true and people shouldn't believe in it. I mean, I think you can be rational, logical, and believe in God. I hope I am. But I don't see what benefit removing religion has, because people will just find something to replace that gap.
So
which is why we need to. Sorry, Wick, I could go next. Sorry.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Which is why we need to gatekeep religion more, right? Like that's the reason, is because when people read things and don't experience them.
To ask you, Johnny, just to elaborate on that, gatekeep religion more. Can you explain?
Absolutely. So when I outlined what I think religion is, that is primary, that isn't secular, or isn't also secular, I said that it is a place for people to go for experiences that can't otherwise be explained. Therefore, religious experiences, spiritual experiences. And to speak about those things, ideally, you would have something like the Hasidic Jews, where you have a culture around people being very scholarly and speaking intellectually about these things when they happen.
So what does that mean in regards to the gatekeeping? I'm trying to connect these dots and I'm just failing.
I think that there are lots of ways to build a state and a social structure in a way to get people to do martial arts and yoga. All of those things can be secular. But gatekeep religion means maybe you shouldn't believe in something that you haven't felt or experienced. Maybe the answer is for religion to evolve, to become more, the proof is where I need it. The proof is in my life. And I got into a whole thing today on my stream about like what is objective personhood and then what is objective to other people that you can prove. I hope we don't have to get into that.
Well, sure. So maybe kind of a.
Can I respond real quick to Beckett's question earlier? So
Okay, sure.
Beckett, you were trying to ask the question, why looking badly on religion if religion's bad are because it's caught up in the state? And the argument to me is twofold. One is that religion is a spectrum. There are plenty of religions which have explicitly like violent, explicitly sectarian, explicitly evangelical goals in them. Christianity is one of them. It controls the most powerful country on earth. It controls one of the two parties of the like most powerful country on earth. One of the reasons that we support Israel so strongly is because evangelicals think that we have to do so to bring about the end times. That's like a really bad consequence, in my view, of a deep religious belief. And it would not happen if evangelism was not a part of the United States, if Christianity was like far, far, far weaker. The argument I would give is that I perceive a lot of these things on a spectrum. We have religions like Christianity, which embodies a lot of political functions, like evangelism, like trying to maintain power, like trying to pursue political goals. And as you get further and further from that, and more towards some kind of like pseudo-spiritual deism or whatever, then that gets more and more tolerable. But that's the argument, that we should want to move in that direction and maybe even just take the last step and get rid of the belief in the afterlife, get rid of the belief in the supernatural, get rid of the belief in God, because that too may lead people towards bad beliefs, like beliefs in mystical cures, beliefs that their souls need to be saved, and so on. That's the argument.
Can I just counter very quickly before we go? Sorry, Socrates. So I can see those arguments, and again, I just to kind of like touch onto that. I agree with you in principle, but people are going to move in certain directions in whatever society and then start making decisions based on their belief structure. So yes, people may get more rational, but as we've moved into a more capitalistic society, we see more people being scammed by MLMs. We see people getting scammed by NFTs and crypto, and the belief that this can make us rich and happy. I think that...
Speaking of making you rich and happy, thank you for the raid, Touring News. Welcome to the show, and if you want to be rich and happy, follow the channel. And
Tireless shill, Mr. Wick. Support.
Okay.
Very based.
Sorry about that.
But yeah, I think that I see your arguments there, but also I think religion kind of provides people kind of a shared grouping to exist within. And while that can be really bad because it can otherize people, I would argue that there seems to be some good information that we do need for our own security to kind of have those shared concepts, at least as a nation. Religion plays a nice baseline for that. I think it's dangerous when you're starting to build policy on it in the modern day, but obviously I'm a Westerner. I'm going to have those opinions.
So unless you think, like SDL, I don't know, because you have a pretty strong stance against religion based on your opening statement, unless you think that the state is incapable of completely divorcing itself from attachment to a religion, I'm not really sure why that would be your indictment of religion itself. Does that make sense?
The argument I'm giving is first that you can imagine religions directly taking control of the state, as they have done so through, say, the Republican Party. But beyond that, religion clearly influences, like even in a fairly secular country, religious voters might vote differently than would secular voters. Let's imagine that you believe that there is a soul and that certain actions are required to save that soul, as do like 70% of Americans. That might inform which party you vote for. That might inform which policies you promote, like, say, not letting kids know that gay people exist. And that seems like it has pretty large negative outcomes. I would want a world where everyone would just sit down and try and like find some, basically the argument goes, these are non-objective reasons, these are non-rational reasons to support a policy. And I think that the more non-rational reasons you have in a society, the more likely you are to pick a bad policy. So once you get to like that level of religiosity, the harms get smaller and smaller, but it would still be good to have them to be zero, right?
Okay, I see what you're saying.
Okay,
Becky,
just very quickly. I can see where you're coming from, but historically speaking, that just hasn't played out. When we're looking at things like the French... sorry, Socrates. Sorry, I will shut up after this.
I'm trying to keep it all in my head, we'll see.
Yeah, no, but when we're looking at something like the French Revolution, they kicked out religion, built a republic, and it's so, like, you'll hear these comments in America of, well, France is banning Muslim iconography. It's like, yes, but it's in line with how they treat Christian iconography as well, because they are a secular state and have been since the late 1700s. but they still executed 40,000 people, and they still do things that seem irrational because they have belief structures about their culture that can otherize people. Sorry, Socrates.
You
Yeah.
keep Beckett, you keep fluttering over the
Wait.
can otherize component.
Thank you
Sorry,
for
go
the
ahead.
$2, Trib. Religion is a cult. I believe in God,
Sure,
not
do
religion. Fair
otherwise,
enough.
then.
Thank you.
Do
Carry on.
otherwise.
though.
They
I'll buy that
do,
for it.
they do, and they will. They do, and they will. And I think again, we have enough of a sample size to suggest that this is how they go. I know Johnny Sikhism was a really good example. I think let's see how it goes is probably my answer to that. But honestly, man, in SDL, this kind of speaks to your point. I believe that spirituality and religion together are basically the antithesis of science. So, and to your point, it would
Wait,
probably be better.
Sorry, just a point of clarification. Did you mean like politics and religion? You said spirituality and religion together.
Those two things. So spirituality, I consider like the independent practice of like some sort of religion or whatever, some belief in the supernatural or what happens after you die or whatever it is. In tandem with, again, because when I say religion, I specifically mean the establishment of a church. So those two things together, I think are the opposite side of the coin. The other side of it is being science. It would probably be better if we made our policy decisions and things that had real world implications based on science, empirical evidence, and things that are demonstrated to be objective fact. That's true. Beckett, I think the problem that I have with you kind of dismissing and hand waving at like, well, they can otherize people or whatever, is that the remaining questions that humanity has unanswered, I think will always be unanswered. So I think religion has always served to answer things we didn't understand. For instance, ancient religions didn't know why it rained, so they came up with a god that made it rain, etc. God of war,
Sure,
God of
but
love.
Bertrand Russell, religion tells us what we can't know, science tells us what we can.
Right, but the remaining questions that we have are things that are very, very integral to the human experience. So I think the three questions remaining that science has not answered to this point that religions do answer is what happens after we die, why are we here, and what is good. And those three things are going to make people very, very passionate and very ideologically motivated to demonstrate that they are the correct one. So it will otherwise people.
That's really something that I find to be really confined. That's a super confined set of even the fact that you say that religion is explicitly here to have answers. That to me is super confining to how it's actually played out for people who engage in it socially, right? Like people
I don't think
having. So have you ever experienced something that you would consider to be a religious experience?
No. Can you give me
Okay.
an example?
Okay. So
If you're
in
comfortable.
Taoism, and this is sort of general and then personal, okay? In Taoism, there is a sense that the Tao you can speak of is not the true Tao. Right? A lot of people in the sports community will call this flow state. A lot of people will say that you are acting without thinking. The Tao. The Tao is the sense of being, doesn't really have a direct translation. This is an unspeakable human experience. And it happens to people sometimes, and it some people describe it as an angel coming over them. That is one very limited experience. It saves people's lives. It allows people to react very quickly to situations that they don't even know are happening. That's one very limited experience.
There may be a physiological explanation and mechanism behind this. So obviously,
Okay.
I think science, medicine would call this the subconscious.
And if you consider that, right? And you come to someone and you say, I have had this insane experience. There is not another place that you can go where people will accept the things that other people will say, well, that's unexplainable, but we can't help it. In a religious space, you have a way to say, okay, and this admittedly is making religion into a place where you can discuss things and not just have a set of rules you have to follow. Okay,
I see.
distinct Hasidic Judaism.
If I
I've got to
gotta get
disagree, just
like
on-
I'm gonna call the flag.
Okay, yeah,
Socrates has yet to speak, and he's been waiting so long. So I'm going to force
Sorry.
him in here. I'm going to forcibly insert him to the conversation. Socrates, the floor is yours.
All right. So, just going all the way back, Johnny, when you were talking about like gatekeeping religion, I think maybe what you're talking about is kind of a cultural attitude toward being part of a religion. This is something that came up in like the 2010s with Richard Dawkins talking about like you shouldn't call like a child like a Muslim child or a Christian child or a Jewish child. Maybe they have that background, but until they're at a point where they have kind of decided that that's what they want to be part of, it's kind of weird to affiliate them that way, because that's something that you were saying, like, have that kind of experience and decide, yeah, this is how I feel, this is how I relate to things. I think there's other reasons to gatekeep religion in terms of how we talk about it. So I think there's a place for saying, so, MLK was a Christian. Trump sometimes calls himself a Christian, or Pat Robertson calls himself a Christian, who said that 9/11 was God's punishment for homosexuality in America. I think if you if you talk to any real religious scholar, they'll tell you that like only one of these, you could say, has some kind of alignment to like a religion of love, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's a way to talk about, I feel like we've kind of ceded ground to the religious right, and as they get more kind of unhinged and evil, we've said that they've become more fundamentalist or more fanatical, which maybe fanatical is acceptable, but but on the left anyway, we don't use the language of saying, well, you're acting in an unchristian way. You're a heretic. You're not acting as a Christian. I think there's something to be said for gatekeeping and not simply giving away the ground to religion. And then what was I going to say? Shoot, there are a bunch of things. Okay, you can come back to me.
Okay, fair enough.
Because you have to remember what fundamentalist means, right? It's exclusionary. And again, I wanted to talk about this with you guys from a perspective of like what religion can be as well, because yes, religion can be exclusionary. Anything secular also as a group can be exclusionary. So like religion exclusively to this conversation, maybe I'm being too specific. Maybe you guys would rather like...
I'm sorry. Go ahead. It's not the otherizing itself or the exclusionary nature of it that's the problem. It's the like, I'm going to kill all of the people who don't believe in the thing that I believe. That's the problem.
Is that something that
wanting
you're
to
talking
legislate
about?
based on this, or when I talk about what's problematic, what drives conflict, what motivates harm as a result of religion, those are the things I'm talking about. I'm talking about states that pass legislation that is founded on religious views that are, ostracizing or punishment or punitive to people who don't subscribe to their belief system. I'm talking about conflict over land that is rooted in divine entitlement to that piece of land. I'm talking about all these things.
Similar to McCarthyism,
can I go
right?
after SDL? Is that all right, Wick? Can I go after SDL?
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, there's a gap.
Why would you just
so I'm just going to jump in.
and just be like, I'm going to go after this?
Yeah, I mean, like,
talking.
So when we talk
talk
about
when
religion,
you want to talk. If there's an issue and a lot of people want to talk, I'll decide. But yeah, I get.
Yeah, no, I just want to go after.
When
SDL.
Go ahead, Socrates.
So when
Socrates,
there's religious conflict and people want to kill people because they're a different religion, this is where I have to bring it back to ideology, because over the last 100 years, America has waged wars, both overtly and covertly, not over religion, but over things like communism. And I can't easily see what kind of differences there are between the kind of reasoning that this is just evil, this has to be eradicated from the world, that separates that from the kind of reasoning that leads to religious wars. But America, we haven't had religious wars. We've had those kind of wars over toppling communist regimes.
What do you think has a higher death toll?
What?
Is
I guess-
is that the game we're gonna play?
Well, I might
Yeah.
It's just a question.
SDL, go ahead.
I might come at this from another perspective. So just last week, Lindsey Graham, a sitting U.S. senator, said that we are in a religious war and we should flatten Gaza. While it is true that many of the wars the U.S. fought in had other geopolitical motives, like religion was often a subtext of that we have to kill the godless communists, that like the Muslims in the Middle East, like people use the language crusade for the Iraq war, for the Afghanistan war. I think the argument would be like bloodlust is higher because of religion. It is easier to get to the point of violence because
The
religion
argument-
gets
So
us
just
there.
That's your argument.
so just
is that
to
people become more passionate about religion because they feel that their entire eternity is on the line.
Well,
I'm just trying to help you out.
Wait, so just a
just
tiny
a direct
point.
question. Just a direct question before you go, Socrates. And Beckett,
Yeah.
I see you. I get to
Yeah.
you. I promise you. But a direct question to
see.
you, SDL. I asked you this last night, Socrates, and I'll ask SDL. Do you think that the reason that Hamas does what it does is based on its religion?
I think 95+% is not based on religion. It's fundamentally,
Really?
I think, about I think Hamas is fighting primarily because they want, like, I do not see them as liberation fighters or whatever. I think they want like Gaza to take over. They want like Palestine to take over. They have a view that is like an ethno-religious view of how to build Israel, how to build Palestine, and so that's what motivates them. Religion is a part of that, but part of it too is like they talk about the like Hamas talks about like Jewish people as well, and not just like religious people. They talk about wanting to expel people from the areas. So I think it's much more than religion. It's like a motivator, but I don't know. It's an add-on.
I don't know if I'd agree with that. That seems like at the core of what they do, how they recruit, how they motivate their people, how they talk about what they want. Everything seems to flow through this kind of religious, kind of very fundamental.
Let me turn it back around. Like take something like labor Zionism, which in my view, like labor Zionism was the socialist or left support for the Zionist project in like the 60s, 70s, 80s, especially. And that was a very secular project. And yet it has birthed an immensely religious nation, which uses religion to motivate its soldiers, which uses religion to justify its conflict, which has like people like the Knesset cites things about making the country a Jewish nation. So I guess all I would say is like I tend to think of Hamas as primarily political. Most of these terrorist groups are primarily political. Religion is just one tool to motivate people in that fight.
The conflict in Israel-Palestine, to be clear, is historically born of religion, but I think the modern day, like what we're seeing now, is more a result of like a conflict about self-determination and like Palestinian nationalism. So I agree with everything SDL just said. I think that religion, we can point the finger far back enough and say that this is a Muslim and Jewish conflict, but I don't think that that's really like
But is that
painting.
cultural or religious?
Wait, so I just want to jump in. So as an American,
let
I think
Beckett go first. Let Beckett
No,
go first.
let Socrates go first. He hasn't spoken.
so as an American, I expect
Okay.
once we start getting into this issue of the Middle East, probably not getting out for 20 years. So let me just quickly respond to a point that's outside of this, and we can have some intractable quagmire of a conversation. SDL, you mentioned when it came to anti-USSR, talking about the godless Soviets, right? That was a motivator. But remember that it was during that time that under God was added to the Pledge of Allegiance in order to create some kind of distinction. So religion was used as a language, but it was clearly not the prime mover in that conflict.
I think the problem here is that causality is going to be circular for all of this. Religion helps motivate the initial escalation, and that escalation helps create division between like the Soviet Union and the United States. And as that evolves, you use religion as a way to set yourself apart. It's like it's
so how would you
Go
say that initially religion escalated like the Cold War or something? I'm not an expert at that.
I mean, so like for some, this gets into like very minor things, but if you look up, say, like the Family or the Fellowship, I believe is what it's called. They were founded in, I think, 1933 to oppose FDR's policies. One of the things they really hated, like a lot of religious conservatives hated, was, okay, people might not know this. The Soviet Union wasn't recognized by most governments for like 2 decades or so. FDR did. That's one of the big things that got him on the shit list of the religious right. And part of the reason that it did so is the Soviet Union was cracking down. It killed something like 100,000 priests. And so like, the roots go deep. But I just want to say, like, I don't know that religion is the first step that you could, but it's one of the escalators. It's like adding more fuel to the fire is how I see it.
It's a confounding factor. Yes.
I mean, there
Thank
are
you.
clearly. I would argue it's symptomatic. That's kind of the problem. It's like I can see people like in my chat with SDL's take on Hamas not being entirely religiously motivated, and like, why would you say that? But actually, I kind of agree with you. I think if religion was gone, people would still be doing this. People of the same religions have gone to war consistently and slaughtered each other through history. When Japan invaded China, they justified the massacres of the Chinese as they weren't real Buddhists. Like, I think the problem is that if you took away that fuel, the fire just burns as hot because people will find those other things. When we're looking at the USSR, ultimately they were a military and governmental geopolitical power that the US was in conflict with post World War II.
𝕵𝖎𝖎, I think you can
they
argue.
find-
I think you can argue that yes, there would still be conflict in the Middle East and Palestine and Israel if religion was off the table. But I don't think you could argue that it would be as hot, right? Like it takes a. I think it just
no,
like
hold on,
the
hold on,
There are
accelerant.
people willing to die over communism.
Yeah, like people would die over. This is ideological. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that the religion there is filling a hole. You'd still need creed. You'd still need cultural grouping. You'd still need something to otherize other groups. I'm not saying that those things aren't important, but I'm saying that religion is filling a gap. It is symptomatic of a problem. It is not the cause of the problem. And so removing one of those symptoms, yeah, sure, we can start cutting out pieces of tumor if that's the argument, but I don't really see how that cures the illness.
Well, I mean,
So
I have
just-
a response to that, but if no one else wants to go ahead.
Yeah.
Well, sure. So just talking about like the, I guess we're definitely getting into Israel-Palestine conflict.
No.
I mean, us in
don't-
this
we-
conversation, not like Biden carrier.
No one's being taught
But,
that. It should be refreshing.
I mean,
Um,
it can be a generalized thing, right? It doesn't have to be like the
Yeah.
modern conflict, right? Like I think that 𝕵𝖎𝖎 is completely right. There have been a lot of intra-religious fights, but what I would note is a lot of those intra-religious fights were in part based on differences in religion. You brought up the 𝕵𝖎𝖎 Crusade, which was literally an intra-religious fight based on differences in religion, which led to the killing of, I think, like 100,000 people again. It's not
Okay,
because
Go ahead.
Sorry, can I just respond to that really quickly? Because again, like I feel like as close as we're coming to each other, SDL, we're missing key things because one of the reasons that happened wasn't just religious differences. It was the fact that this religion was growing and challenging the church's power. When we're looking at what happened with the Knights Templar being accused of worshipping Baphomet and burned at the stake, that wasn't because the church was actually like, oh my god, they're heretics. It was because the King of France owed a huge amount of money to the Templars because they were essentially running the Pilgrim's Path banks and was like, wouldn't it be easier if they were just fucking dead? I don't think, like, if you, the motivators there are so different. And when you look into the history of the Catholic Church, the history of the Catholic Church is a war between the Catholic Church and Italy as they both vie for power over the religion between the Emperor and the Pope. And the Catholic Church is basically like pictured now in the modern day as this great all-powerful thing that's sort of manipulated history. But the truth is the Catholic Church is balmy and has put dead popes on trial because it's vaguely trying to survive the political machinations of lunatics.
I
And
agree.
I
Go
don't
ahead.
buy that it's got all this power. I just don't buy it. I think it's an excuse.
Johnny, go
I'm
ahead.
kind of like I have something. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
All I was going to say to 𝕵𝖎𝖎 was I don't think that you'd have so part of the problem with those historical contexts is that the church or the monarchy was using the religion as a justification for their political purposes. So I think that is I don't know that you would have had the same level of support behind like especially modern day. You wouldn't have the same type of support behind the actions of the centralized authority or the military or whatever it is without the confounding factor of religion. I think that is what drives people to be so like I think Socrates put it best heretical and wanting blood essentially.
And
Well,
let me
let me
just
speak-
introduce. Yeah.
Let me briefly speak to
Hold on.
Go ahead.
Really quick. I want to introduce something that is specific to religion and spirituality. There is a phenomenon that I think is driving a lot of the conflicts, to speak generally, and that is that people are not having direct experiences. They're going based on books, which are essentially fairy tales. They are going based on their cultural experiences from
Too many
a
books.
toddler.
We should burn them.
Okay, which varies across internationally. But something that answers a question that fills a religious need is what happens after you die. And speaking in a modern religious context, I believe that no one knows what happens after you die. And so I use religion for a different purpose. And so, like, in a modern context, I want to see religions and spiritual spaces being built that don't try to answer questions about death. So I don't know. You could speak about this from a general perspective of, like, is there a cultural standpoint where we are afraid of death to a point where we're building both secular and religious structures that make us afraid and make us want to literally secure our eternity by killing other people, for instance, in some religions?
There's probably
don't
no
know.
greater motivator. There's probably no good secular.
I know. And so,
comparable
like,
motivator.
and so as a spiritual person, I'm concerned with that because I'm like, you really can have these experiences and bond with other people over this without going to a fairy tale that tells you to kill other people. That's just kind of the perspective I'm coming from. I didn't expect us to talk about Israel Palestine because this is
Why would you
this
not
is like
expect that?
I know, Wick,
let-
I know because I'm stupid.
Wait, is there something
Let me-
happening in Israel? Fuck, I hadn't.
Go
And-
ahead.
No,
go
I know
ahead.
what's happening in Israel, but I have
And
people in my
Palestine, too.
community. Yes, I know, baby. There are people in my
Sorry.
community who are very close to that conflict
Yeah.
on every possible side of it, and I would like to be only beneficial to them in the way that I speak about it.
Let me Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Let me speak briefly to the idea of religion as motivator. Beckett, you mentioned the Knights Templar being like accused of like worshiping the wrong gods and being killed. That's a useful tool for a political like leader to have. You don't just say, "Hey, I'm killing this guy to get rid of my debts." You say, "I'm killing this guy because he's a heretic, because he believes the wrong thing." It's one thing that lowers the cost of political violence, right? And similarly, you ask about like, well, what is the power of the Catholic Church? For an example of how powerful that church was over the years, in Spain at the time of the Spanish Civil War, the Catholic Church owned 1 in 3 parcels of land in the country. Like, they were immensely powerful directly and indirectly. It's so clear that they are like one of the ways that you go to get power. It's the reason every ruler in church sides with them. Every historical ruler.
I agree with everything you just said, and it supports my perspective that the establishment of the church creates sort of a social or even maybe historically a political hierarchy that enables certain institutions or certain people in positions of power to completely abuse those who come. Go ahead, Beckett.
Sorry, no, go and finish.
Those who come to them seeking the answers that Johnny and I are talking about, or those who come to them seeking what it means to be a good person, or those who come to them because they had a religious experience, which is an interesting component I didn't really think about this from. But people who basically come to them for answers, for fulfillment, for some type of satisfaction or community or whatever, the church has historically predated on those people. So like I think that SDL, I agree with everything you just said, and I think that we don't even need to look that far back to look at like how many children were sexually abused by the French Catholic Church.
Absolutely, but I think it's selective. So just quickly on the religious experience thing, because I've seen Johnny ask a lot of questions. So I'm somebody who believes in God. I believe predominantly because I've had a series of religious experiences through my life. I am very, very skeptical of my own belief, and why I end up spend so much time looking at religion. But at the same time, I think those are poor arguments to convince anybody. I'd never argue from that kind of authority of like, well, I've had this experience, because I think it's meaningless, and I think it's meaningless in religious conversations. Like, I couldn't bring my experiences to a Christian or a Muslim and expect like a good result, because it's fundamentally different. But
what's interesting?
Just to shift to, hold on, one second. I want to shift to this. Well, it's in my head. I agree with you to an extent, Kylo, but at the same time, like when we've seen rulers completely dismantle religions in their own country and the church, like the Catholic Church, like let's take Britain, let's take Henry VIII. Henry VIII wanted a divorce. He was a most people, I don't know if they know this, but he was known as a defender of the Catholic Church before this happened. He was an incredibly well-educated religious scholar in his youth, and he used to debate theology regularly. When the Catholic Church denied him a divorce, he essentially dismantled the monasteries and ripped out Catholicism from the UK and said, right, we're starting a new religion, it's Anglicanism, and he was able to do that. Now, yes, he still used the framework of going, actually, I am the divine one, but the rest of Europe, one of the reasons that England has been at such high conflict is because the church was like, well, we should probably do something about heretics in England. But importantly, we were still having wars with the French before then. We were still having wars with the Spanish before then. We are still having these intense conflicts. And when we look at like religious persecution, for example, of the Jewish people through history, that persecution isn't just to do with the fact that they are not the same religion. It's to do with the fact that they were brought in for a purpose into countries, which was money lending, because Christians couldn't do it. They made an awful lot of money because they essentially had a designed monopoly on the market that was lucrative. And then when people got pissed off and rulers needed an easy enemy to hate, they'd go, well, I think that's because they have all the money, so we should either get them to convert or kick them out. And that happened consistently. And it wasn't because of the religious differences, it was because of the power structure differences.
No, but they're
Okay, can I
disguising
respond
it
to
as
this really
religious
quickly? It'll be
differences.
very
they
quick.
disguise it as something else. That's the problem.
Sorry,
I don't.
Johnny, go ahead.
It's
Okay.
a symptom.
Okay, you said, I know that you went on that big diatribe, and I'm sorry, but I'm responding to what you said to me. I'm not trying to convince anyone that I have had an experience and it was real. I am very carefully actually going around that because I want to emphasize to you that I am, for the future, logically assuming that people will continue to have experiences that they cannot explain, that they would like to speak about with people, perhaps from a perspective of tradition and history, and religion or a church or a spiritual center fills that role. And so I'm not convincing you that something that happened to me is real. I'm telling you that logically it follows that these experiences will continue to happen to people. And so I don't know, it's like talking about something that is ascribed to religion that is really just a political conflict in disguise. Like, that seems like a lot of what we're addressing. Yeah.
And you're saying what will be left over even if you...
What is left over? Exactly. Like the
Yeah.
discussion is modern religion. What place does religion have in a modern society? And as a person who engages in that socially, but also has had those personal experiences, I wanted to say that religion has a space beyond something political and something powerful.
That space, just to ask real quick, right? And this is not just to you, but to the panel as a whole. Do we think that space can be filled by secularism, right? To an extent, at least?
It depends
or
on what...
do we think that religion has a unique space that cannot be replicated through other secular means? Why or why not?
It depends on what the space is. So I can't talk about religious experiences and what might drive people to go to Sunday service because they've had a religious... Or sorry, I'm not being reductive. I know you're Tao or whatever, but what I can talk about is the thing that I mentioned about having unanswered questions and religion providing those answers for you. And I do think that we've maybe reached a point where those three remaining questions that I talked about earlier are probably never going to be answered in the entirety of human existence. Because of that, we probably have to adjust the way that we perceive those things and be okay with not knowing the answer to something like what happens after we die, or even like what is good, because I think a lot of religion probably originated from places and nation states not having the resources to police their people effectively, so they introduced a structure of like punishment for like social, inappropriate social behavior or crimes or whatever it is. The consequence of which is you literally burn for all of eternity, in Christianity's example or what have you. So now all we're left is what is good behavior. And I think that secularly we can probably find a way to be okay with saying that it's intangible. You know, I
Mhm.
can't intellectualize what is good. All I can tell you is that kindness is good because it's good and it makes people feel good, and that's kind of all we got. You know what I mean? So I think that's the secular hole that we fill, is just by being okay with not having an intellectual or a scientific answer to things. That's
Yeah.
where I think we should adjust our perspective to.
I guess
Yeah.
I
So
would just,
that. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I've spoken way more than you.
Well, so yeah. So that was the point that I wanted to jump in to make. That of those three, the one that I think needs to be contended with at all times and can never fundamentally be answered by science is what is good. That's a values question.
Yeah.
And subjectivity and non-rationality and intangibles, the kind of things that we feel but can't really describe. That's the realm that a conversation that seeks to not find, answers. I guess kind of like ethics would be, the realm of like trying to find kind of concrete individual answers. But the realm of values would have to address those questions. And I think there's it's like a little bit of a caricature, or it's not. I mean, there's a lot of religious people who think this way, but I don't think religion is fundamentally about exactly like saying like, hey, we've got the answers to these things, as much as like we're the ones who've been asking those questions. So even like the Israel, I think, means struggled with God. Israel, it's like the Jewish people have been struggling with God, with the concept of God, and religious people have been struggling with what happens after we die and all of the emotional baggage that comes into that. What is our
I have
legacy?
to disagree with you. I have
Okay,
to disagree
please,
with
go
you.
ahead.
I don't think
love
that's
it.
true.
Yeah.
I think like philosophy does that,
Sure.
but religion doesn't. Religion, like one of the things that you'll hear people say is like, well, Christianity, you need to have a bit of blind faith. No, you don't. There's no theological grounding for that. In fact, the argument with Christianity is you don't need to have blind faith. Jesus came down, he died for your sins, we've got it recorded, you can see it. It's not a question, it's a telling. And this is part of the fundamental problem with religion. But what I would also say is we do this with other things. Like we do this with science. I meet people who will say things to me about environmental things which are incredibly wrong. They are just bizarre. They've read them in some article on Facebook, and they believe them. And I am sat there going, no. But it's really hard to tell people that, because in the same way that we do this with religion, people have started to do it with science. Like a few years ago, we had the Facebook page like I fucking love science, and it was just bite-sized bit of chunks that people like taking. And when something comes out of from an expert that doesn't match up with a narrative, or people don't understand like the full scientific process, people are going to feel uncomfortable with that. People talk about science in this really solid way, except for scientists who tend not to. So
I was just going to say, as a scientist,
problem,
I hate
right?
that shit.
This is one of the fundamental differences, though, between like a religious mode of thinking and a secular mode of thinking, or a scientific mode of thinking, though, is that like science, or at least most scientists, operate on, and maybe I'll get shit for this, but it's something close to scientific realism. Something like the no miracles argument. That right now we're talking over internet communication, which requires like transmission with satellites, which requires atomic clocks to be accurate. Those things would be so miraculous if the science underpinning them.
Sacrifice to Satan. Okay.
And
don't forget,
of course, the little blood offering you put into your computer every day. These scientific achievements would be miraculous if we were just guessing. So instead, it seems like we are actually approaching the truth in a lot of these things, that through experimentation, we can approach the truth. But when you look at like religious scholars over the meaning of the earth or history or whatever, they are citing like a book. They are citing like texts. They are citing
unless
religious.
you're Thomas Aquinas. Unless you're Thomas
yeah,
Aquinas, literally changing all of
Just
mathematics
really quick,
and
I don't mean to interrupt.
literally inventing set theory, essentially.
$100 from Lex Friedman. Great panel. Thanks, Wick.
Whoa, shit.
Whoa,
Thank you.
Nice.
Lex.
Continue.
Oh my god, the Lex Friedman.
But let's go, because you mentioned Aquinas. Let's talk about like Augustine's methods of this, and the fact that natural philosophy originates in the church for a reason. So when Augustine wrote City of Gods Against the Pagans, he was arguing that the pagans were the cause of the fall of Rome. He didn't just do that from scripture. Augustine basically deconstructed paganism, deconstructed their miracles. Augustine said the pagan miracles are like about the same as a saint or a martyr, therefore they're like equal to a fraction of the power of God. You can see the debate brewing of like religion all through history. Now you can say that, okay, well, they're based on like nebulous concepts, but at the same time we are still doing that.
Well,
nothing substantive whatsoever.
Okay, but that's
just based on
the time.
All of Islam.
Yeah, but that's not the point. I'm not arguing for the existence of God. I'm arguing that when St. Augustine did this, he's using rhetoric in the same way that we do with like modern politics.
He's speaking about, but you're also drawing a comparison between the way that we perceive science and medical advancements and things like that now versus like developments in religion. And I think that
it's not a perception. He was literally illustrating a scientific method laid out by the church or a person in a church. It wasn't a comparison. It was a direct.
So I don't know that I would just like religious people can do science. The argument here is that specifically religious modes of thinking are ultimately grounded in like that religious text, that religious tradition or whatever. And the argument is that
again, not necessarily. Like you're speaking about religion again from a standpoint of people believing something that was written before they were ever born. And
I mean, new religious movements do the same thing. No. Like, look at Scientology. Okay, God could still be alive. They're still basing it in his teachings. They're still basing it in his religious tradition. And the argument is those foundational beliefs lead people to wrong conclusions because they aren't fundamentally based on a theory of experimentation and rejection of false beliefs. That's the argument.
Okay. Wait, do you doubt Xenu? What the fuck?
Yeah, my bad.
Oh no, we could tolerate a lot here, but I don't know about doubting.
This conversation. And Becky, I just want to, maybe you can explain it more something if I'm not grasping the concept, but like this feels like a comparison because if we're saying, and like SDL was kind of saying earlier, the thing that would probably be more beneficial for society over time would be to more rely on and be able to reconcile differences with scientific method. But when someone talks about scientific method and empirical data and stuff like that, they're talking about something substantive. There's nothing substantive about Gabriel coming down and talking to Muhammad and Muhammad, preaching the word of Gabriel. And
Kilo, you're wrong, and I'll explain why. I was a Mormon missionary for 2 years, way back in the day. One of the things we did, and one of the arguments that we led with, the persuasive argument, we love what I feel, is that we can show you through a process that you can repeat and you can gain an experience, just like I have had, just like all my other Mormon friends have had before me. We can help you have that experience, and we lay out some steps in some ways. If you do X, Y, and Z, if you follow our teachings, you will get this result, right? And by doing that and by laying it out, we could build a path, right, that people could follow. And it was pretty successful. Like the Mormon Church for years was one of the fastest growing religions in the world, right? Like a lot, it worked.
Are you still Mormon?
No,
Are you still Mormon?
I'm inactive. Let's say that.
I guess a follow-up question: what were the steps towards? What were you getting people to do?
Basically,
what's the experience?
Okay, so one of the scriptures that we use, the Book of Mormon, funnily enough, it was called Moroni's Challenge, right? And I'm going to paraphrase it here. But if you do these things, if you follow these teachings, and you ask the Lord God with all your might, heart, mind, and strength, he will tell you the answer by the burning in the bosom, right, that you will feel, the feelings and the experiences that you will have, and that you will know through the Spirit of God that this is true. And a lot of people, right, when they put themselves in that state, when you do these things that make your life better, right, and some of these things will absolutely make your life better. Stop smoking. Stop drinking, right? Stop doing all these things. Start exercising and being more healthy. Go out, socialize in church, things like that. Come to a church, build a community. It is going to improve people's lives, especially if they're, again, don't have a lot of friends, don't have a lot of things. And so they will absolutely experience this. Now, the thing is, we would say God did that, but was it really? And that's the question, right? But it was absolutely something that was replicable and something that not everyone felt, but a good enough portion felt that it was something that we could run with, right?
So one of the old definitions of knowledge was justified true belief, and I'm just bringing it up in this conversation for the point of bringing that up. The point here is that what you're talking about is the Mormon missionaries led people to a true belief. They did things that truly made them feel better. But the question is, was it a justified belief? Did the Mormon missionaries sit down and go, I'm reading from the journal of nicotine studies that ending smoking will make people's lives better? Or did they start from a spiritual basis, which didn't give them a justification for that? That's the argument I'm trying to give in all of this. Yes, I'm sure that religion gives people meaning. Yes, I'm sure it answers questions. The question is whether those answers are both true, often I don't think they are, and justified, whether they are grounded in something that we think is a truth-yielding process.
Yes. And
Well, wait.
It doesn't matter that there's...
So just to jump in there...
Super briefly.
Okay.
I'll let you go right after.
Okay.
The reason why that matters is because the doctrine that is associated with that religion, even if there is a palatable and substantiative response, like a physiological response in the body or an experience, quote unquote, to talk about, what Johnny was talking about, the doctrine that is associated with that religion is then thereby justified by the people who practice it, including...
Speaking of justified, 2-year sub from Tenflix. Thank you. Anyway, carry on. Go ahead.
So it is then justified for the exclusionary practices, the otherizing of people, the things that we were talking about earlier. That's the problem with relying on the religious origination of the experience or whatever as the basis for it, instead of some sort of
the
physiological
problem
or psychological.
is that we're not gatekeeping the experience as a way to firmly believe in something. We have been taught by, I assume we're all white Western people, right? We have been generally taught in this religious diaspora that we are to follow a book. And you all, I assume that you are all speaking about this from a very historical standpoint where you're talking about believing in the book and not experience anything. And then when you have religious experiences, it's the same as being at a concert. And I get it. I do get it. We need to gatekeep so that we can have discussion spaces, especially. I would really appreciate open public discussion spaces where we can do what, again, is very traditional in Hasidic Judaism and be curious and scholarly about this. And I want to point out people are actively building this type of thing with the cult of the mushroom. You can call it a bunch of different things, but
And
there is also there is a repeatable psychedelic experience that is involved in psilocybin that people are actively rejoicing in and building communities around. And it's because it feels like it's something special and important.
The cult of
And
the
so
mushroom.
that's where we're building new things as far as religion goes.
I don't think that's new, though. Scholarship, science, these come from very religious backgrounds. These are all things that are, again, were birthed in kind of religious settings. And I think that you're shaking your head or you're going like this. Am I wrong? I'm pretty
yes,
sure.
actually.
Well,
so a lot of early scholars
on this. Go ahead.
a lot of early scholars were deeply religious, and I'm not going to deny that. But when we look at statistics, when we start to reach into the 1500s, scholarship was most condensed among the least religious people and the least religious places in early modern Europe, for example. Literally one example is people with non-religious names were something like 3 or 4 times more likely to publish scientific texts than were people with religious names.
Non-religious names. That's a
I know it sounds
point to kind of like a data point to kind of hang your hat on with that. I don't know if that's convincing to me.
It's because we don't have a good way to measure the religiosity of scientists from 1500. So what people use is they use a proxy of religious names. And we know from a lot of causal data. So after an earthquake, for example, religious names are something like 50% more likely after an earthquake. And so is religion. People get a lot more faith after these big cosmic events happen to them. And so there's reason to think that people with more religious names come from more religious families, and they are way underrepresented in the early scientific revolution, is all I'm trying to get at.
Seems plausible.
Okay, but also...
we would never... Hold on. We would never accept that as a data point to kind of make any firm conclusions off of in any other setting. It's really weak data.
Because you're talking about religion from a perspective of this cult tradition standpoint, and that's generally associated with people who are of lower status historically. There's a million reasons why that
also so a lot of early natural philosophy comes from the church, exploration of the world, actually seeing what the world looks like, Bishop
genetics,
the test of Lincolnshire. like his work was studied by Lancaster recently because what he seems to be describing sounds an awful lot like the Big Bang. He basically said, how did God create the universe? And his conclusion was God put light into it. And the way he describes how light works seems really similar. Now, again, this is hundreds of years ago, but at the same time, like, we see a lot of natural philosophy come out of the church because they were the only people with the money, time, and education to undertake that work. So, yes, I accept that, like, not having those, so this is where the word atheism comes from. It's the idea that you are divorcing God from the process. You're not making the assumption like that, like people like Descartes did with the solipsistic whole, that God is the solution to that. But at the same time, an awful lot of religious people have been fine building things. When we see sort of like the cradle of civilization in the Middle East, that wasn't done in a non-religious setting. It's just that they were able to still pursue those things within religion. Galileo, Darwin, all these people are still religious. They're still Christians, and they still are able to have those findings, even if they're difficult. Like, I think human intelligence and will, like, leads through, even in the case where it's against.
And I would also argue, before anyone else jumps in, that the way that most people interact with science today is religious in nature. You don't go out and do the experiments yourself. You don't look to the experts. You only look to the experts, which seems to, like, again, feed into your preconceived notions. We believe, right? We believe when someone tells us something, or read the scientific report or something. Most people, not everyone, but most people are not literate enough and not educated enough to know when they are being bamboozled. That's why we have things like the replication crisis. That's why we have things like Alzheimer's research was just made up for years, right? Made up. And everyone's just like, oh, okay.
The sociology scandal at Harvard that's just happened. The massive claims of data fraud for one of the most prominent sociology professors on the planet is being accused of faking her data. We see this
because you can but you can prove that they faked the data. That's the difference. You can prove that those numbers are not real. That's the difference between the two things you're talking about. It's not; those are not comparable.
Yes, but people still,
dynamics,
people still hung their hats on them. People
Sure.
lectured on
Yes,
them.
it's a
People
problem.
based
Absolutely.
entire theories in workplaces on them. But at the
Sure.
same time, like, but
absolutely
this
a
is humans doing this. It's like you can argue that
100%.
we've got better process
Sure.
for finding those things.
But that's
my
the argument,
is
yeah.
you're still going to have them. You're still going to have exactly the
but
same fucking problem.
The argument. The argument for
ahead,
science is not that it gets everything right. It's that it tends towards more correctness over time. That the process is like self-correcting or truth apt or something. It's moving us in that direction. Like, just to give an example, you mentioned a writer, I guess like 100 or 200 years ago or whatever, who wrote something which sounded like the Big Bang. Okay, how would we know whether his theories were right if not for measuring infrared shifting from distant universes? We would only know whether his writing was worth shit or not based on the testing of his theories. That's the argument for something like scientific realism.
This is why Judaism and Jainism and Buddhism have been around for as long as they have, because you can't refute them, but they're not substantial.
Hell yeah.
No, they're experiential. They're not unverifiable in the sense that you don't know if they happened.
If
they
were
are experiential.
If they were,
they are experiential in that they are true, but they cannot be proven.
The point is in the comparison between the scientific method and the empirics and those types of things versus the practice of religion as being the basis for someone's belief system. What SDL just said is the difference between those two things. Science changes over time because we do falsify things.
But that's not how humans interact with it.
What is
just real quick. No, I have to step in here because this is important, right? All these issues that we are talking about with religion, right? That it's used to justify these horrific things, and sometimes it is used to stifle things. We have seen this play out from a scientific standpoint as well, right? People shut down by saying, well, this is what the studies say, not knowing what the actual studies say, right? The way we as a people, as a culture, have interacted with science is in many ways very similar to religion with very similar problems. Now, you can argue that, as SDL does, that the scientific process, the scientific method does lead us closer and closer and closer to truth, but that is not always the case. right? We can
Eugenics
see.
and lobotomies.
But
Yes,
it's
exactly.
never the
Eugenics and
case with
lobotomies.
religion. It's never the case with religion is the problem. It is
What do you
often
mean?
the case
What
with
do you mean?
science.
No,
I mean,
hold on.
is never the case.
Like
What is
religion,
never the
religion
case?
absolutely pushes back on ideas within itself that it disagrees
Yeah.
with.
That can't be
like
substantiated.
the history.
How-
No, the
What do you mean it
history
can't
of
be substantiated?
Christianity
We literally
is
just
having
went over Thomas
debates
Aquinas.
on. Yeah,
sure,
like,
but how do we
the-
know
the
that modern
his-
Christian theory is closer to the truth than old Christian theory? How
You-
do I know?
That's my
Nobody is
point.
Yeah,
claiming that.
but the question isn't whether God exists or whether the truth is there. The question is like whether these things, like how they function in society. And you're saying, well, these are highly damaging. But when we look through history and those debates that are happening in science, those also have happened in religion. Now you can say that like they trend towards like certain outcomes within science, and that we're also progressing at a vastly better rate. More of us are educated, more people are able to engage in those conversations. But the truth is, like way back in like 1700 years ago, Augustine is arguing like the form of Christianity that we should have. Augustine is saying Christianity needs to become more aggressive. It needs to become more like compartmentalized off and exclusionary. We need to make sure that, you know, nobody is making stuff up about the religion so that the pagans can blame us for things. And these mattered because when Augustine was arguing these things, that's 8, by the way, give me some subs. When sorry, they were like, they'll call you out at like 5 for keeping mentioning him. But like when he was saying that, they needed to like build a system that protected them culturally. And religion in this case was the way that they did that, but we're still going to keep doing it with other systems. We do it with capitalism, we do it with socialism, we do it with communism. And we have witnessed recently plenty of people taking ethical sides that they wouldn't normally take because they want to defend what they see as ideologically on the same path as them. People will excuse atrocities by the USSR if they're tankies because they're like, well, communism good, capitalism bad. And
Well,
I don't see how that's any realistically and fundamentally different.
the argument here is not that debate is like how you approach truth. The argument is that the debate has to be founded, grounded in, informed by something else, right? Like the argument is that science, by the process of experimentation, falsification, whatever you want to call it, that tends the debate towards truth. The argument is, again, not science is always right, but that its debates tend towards truth over time. The question that was asked is like, do Christian debates do the same? And what I would point to is politics often has the same problem. If you look at Austrians and a lot of like socialists, some socialists who just take like the work of Lenin or the work of like Marx as gospel, I don't think their theory is advanced whatsoever. They're still debating over fucking like what Karl Marx said over what Lenin said instead of what's actually true. And that's why the theory is so backwards and shitty and why it fucks up so often. The argument is that like in contrast, like empirics-based theory does so much fucking better. That's why like I don't know. The argument is that it's not enough to debate. You need to have some grounding which leads you toward truth. And only science does that. That like religion cannot do that.
I think, but they are still
Wait, so just a
fundamentally
small-
asking different things. Sorry, Socrates, go ahead.
Yes. So I would say that it's actually I don't want to say the opposite, but religion is a process of trying to come into contact with truth, capital T truth. Science is a process that basically rejects the possibility of finding capital T truth kind of from the get-go. That says, you know, everything we can learn, we learn something about something, and the error bars. Those are the things that we're learning, and it's based on some particular theory. And the model is what I would say is the really important thing. Models in science, at the point that they become generally pretty effective, some operating theory, some viewpoint of the world are based on mathematics. They're based on particular forms of experimentation that can be replicated, which doesn't mean that science can't ever interrogate the subjective, but it's doing it in a very different way, and it's looking for a very different outcome. In religion, the viewpoint that any particular person's conception of God or the divine or the unknown or the mysteries of the universe cannot be put into a mathematical formula and cannot be directly compared, or are never identical between any two people. They're definitionally something that's extremely personal and very unique.
They're definitionally subjective, but they are objectively happening. And they're objectively happening to people all across the diaspora of humankind all over the world for the entirety of history. And some of these experiences that were previously considered to be spiritual are now known to have some physical component. There are others, and there will continue to be others, where people are, I think, you know what? I'm going to get on my soapbox for a second. You're all talking about religions that try to answer questions through historical accounts that are probably not true. The religion that I think is the most modern and placed in how people think today is inquisitive and curious, and is less so concerned with things that are absolutely going to be telling you how to live your life, and more so concerned with being aware of the mystery, capital M. It brings people a lot of peace. That's a modern iteration of how we deal with the spiritual. And yes, it's probably more politically fantastical to deal with situations that are wartime, or that are really, I would say, general to all of human constructs of power. But like, religion doesn't
disagree.
have to be.
Again, I disagree with you. That's not what religion is for. So fundamentally what humans do is we tell stories and we build a picture of what's true. And the reason people get so upset when you challenge the concept of God is because you are challenging to them a fundamental concept of something that is true. And there's
religion is something.
Hold on.
Finish, Beckett,
There
but
is
then I
not.
want to give her a chance to
Yeah.
respond. So
Yeah,
I
sure.
want to give
There's a
them a
little
chance to respond. I
experiment
want
you
them
can.
to go back.
There's a little experiment you can do with this, and I used to do it all the time at university. Go to the pub and start calling a glass a bowl, or a fork a knife, and you will watch people become increasingly frustrated and uncomfortable as you do it.
Okay.
Now, those words
Okay.
don't really
You
matter,
don't.
but no, hold on. But fundamentally, we say things that are true to us. And that's just how humans work. We need those things.
We're not saying things that are true to us exclusively. That's not all that's happening here. Like, I am calling spirituality that is organized. You laid it out. You said, or one of you did. You laid it out. You said that it is the spiritual supernatural component combined with the social and disciplinary structures as well. Like,
but that's
we
not
haven't
what
just
most
been going
people
on
need.
spiritual experiences that are unprovable to other people and that are only personal. That's not only what we're going on here.
It's not, but that is what religion is needed for. Like,
Well, so Wick,
those shared
Wick was
truths,
bringing up a
real or not,
situation.
are needed.
Oh, sorry. So
Wait.
Wick was bringing up a situation where he was saying, here's a formula to have this religious experience that changes your life pretty reliably. I mean, you could argue that maybe it is a placebo, but if you compare that placebo to a sugar pill, you might have like a clinical trial there, right? It might be at that level where there's like a significance of effect.
I could only guess at the percent.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I will tell you, like, so the rejection rates were like a funnel, right? Most people would reject us without hearing us out, right? Just from the gate, knock on the door, no thanks, right? But the more time we had with the potential convert, and the more steps that they took, the more likely they were to meet our metrics, which get baptized and then be retained, right? Which means goes to church for so many different weeks in a row, right? And so one of the biggest steps, right, was getting them to the church. And that was a big indicator of whether they were going to continue to progress along the path or not. So yes, you could absolutely get them to take certain actions, which made it much, much more likely for them to take certain steps that we would consider.
God, you make it sound like a pyramid scheme. I love it. It
I mean, no, this is just persuasion,
MLM,
dude.
I think that's how
Like,
I
at the end of the
describe
day,
You were
I don't
encouraged to do this, right?
It's a golden tablet scheme. I mean,
You were encouraged to do this by the church, correct?
Yeah, well, obviously, because again, again, like you can take it one of two ways. You could take it the cynical route, which we wanted our numbers up to get more tithing, to get more money, to get more power and influence, etc. Or you could take the true believer route, which is says, hey, they're all children of God. We're trying to teach them the truth so they can come closer to God and have the experiences that they want to have. You can take it either way. I'm not here to argue that today. I would be interesting to argue with someone
I'd be very happy to.
I'm not really here to argue it either, but the doubt that exists with which one it is enough for me to say it's a little bit questionable.
Are you talking about
doubt,
like social versus
right? There's
Are
always
you talking
doubt.
about like the social experience
could be living
versus
in a
the
simulation.
experience of people sharing the God experience?
Well, the
Is that what
social
you're-
experience is like we are social creatures.
No,
All of us, every single one of us. Yes, we are all each unique individuals, special snowflakes. But at the end of the day, we all have similar experiences in similar settings. It's not 100 1-to-1, but 9 times out of 10, if you isolate someone, they're gonna go crazy, right? 9 times out of 10, if you interact with someone in a certain way, they're going to respond in a certain way, right? If I give someone a compliment, all things being equal, they're going to respond positively to that. Again, it's not a 1-to-1, it's not 100%, it's not perfect, but we can do these generalities. And same with science, right? There are certain general rules that we can follow, right? That can get us to things. So what I'm trying to argue here is that there is very little when the rubber hits the road to how humans interact with it, there is very little difference between religion and science.
Okay, so that's yeah. So I also don't agree, and I was going to say that what you gave as an example is something that proves that simply empiricism isn't exactly all there is to science. Because if just like, hey, we do this thing, we get kind of a predictable result empirically, and therefore this proves our model that it's because God is coming into their hearts and changing their desires. Then exactly what you're saying, that would be science. So what I was stressing was that with science, the model is really the more critical piece, even more so than the empiricism, because the way that we define models, the way that we update models, the way that we can all view models in a concrete and shareable way are some of the hallmarks of what makes something scientific rather than religious. SDL, I can see itching to get in there.
Well, it's just that the model is important because the model enables testing, right? Like you say empiricism. More broadly, we can call it testability. The unique feature of scientific models is that they are testable. The reason that I asked, has Christian modeling advanced broadly? Has Christian thought advanced? Is what models have Christian put forward? How do they know those models are true?
Mormonism is an advancment of the Christian model, right? It's brought out, and we could look at this from other denominations.
No.
Spring
He's
out,
talking about
right?
Point the finger far back enough. Right.
Yeah.
Well, so go before the advancement into Mormonism from Christianity.
Well, the argument I'm trying to give is whether it's truth, right? Like Mormonism is like a revision of Christianity, but is it a truer revision of Christianity? Does it add more things which help people understand truth in the world? Does it help them does it help? In other words, is it a philosophy which leads people to true beliefs and helpful beliefs? And that's
okay, but I think we get stuck on this truth thing because I think that is a standard that religion is not going to prove to people. Let's just be realistic here. Again, going back to the religious experience question, I am not going to sit here on this panel and try and persuade any of you that God exists based on my experiences, because I think that's a pointless thing to do. If the argument is, well, okay, we should believe things that are true, and if they're not true, we should they have no place in modern society. But I don't know whether that kind of works, because fundamentally, we can look at things that are materially true or things that we can absolutely prove. But as we've increased in secularism, it doesn't seem to have made people more content. It doesn't seem to have made people more happy. It doesn't seem to have made people generally that much more rational. People are still tearing each other apart on a day-to-day basis. And look at the anti-theism movement. The anti-theism movement is fundamentally opposed to the existence of religion. All religious people bad, with the same amount of zealotry and fervor as the religious people they hate.
It does.
I don't think that's accurate.
Stance.
I don't think that's.
I don't know.
Wait.
I think.
Wait. So just so you know where I'm coming from, I was someone who was raised in religion, who was interested in. I followed all the kind of new atheist, 2000s, 2010s, Hitchens, Sam Harris, all that bullshit, and I came out of that, and seeing the flaws of it. I never was in like a massively anti-theist mode, but I think it's critical to not validate the religious rights persecution complex about Christians in America are as persecuted as anybody else.
I'm not trying to validate persecution, just to be clear, and this is why I said anti-theist rather than atheist. I'm talking about the people who are, let's say, fundamentalist anti-theists. Who will go a lot further. But I'm not talking about persecution here. I'm talking about the attitude of the people. So the attitude of these, like anyone who believes in religion, like we saw this with Jake. Jake's like this. Anyone who believes in religion is fundamentally insane and can be dismissed and is a bad person, essentially. And like that kind of thing, that's what some of these people are like. I'm not talking about everyone here. It's a very broad brush statement, but my point is that you can still have that sort of fervor and zealotry without the religious framework, unless you want to make the argument that anti-theism is a religion.
But the problem is
there's a religious framework here too, where you're still saying that religion has to be based on a set of experiences that you didn't have, a New Testament book where it tells you Jesus came back and you didn't have that experience, but you believe it, and that's one religious outlet. But there are, and this is exemplified in the Wiccan community in particular, but there are so many modern iterations of people who are spiritual, who are exclusively spiritual because they are, A, they're not seeking answers, but B, they're very curious. They do want to know things that they can know. And they do want to share their experiences where they can, and maybe come to like conclusions with other people.
I don't know if that lines up with how Wiccans and pagans are.
They're very solitary practitioners, and a lot of them come out of.
But I know an awful lot of witches, pagans, druids, because I've got a huge amount of experience with the occult community, who will fundamentally say things like, "You shouldn't do this around Fae. You shouldn't do this on this day. You shouldn't practice in this way. What you are doing is dangerous. Your projection is irresponsible."
One iteration of it. That is one iteration of it. I wanted to give an example of a more solitary practitioner. And obviously I should have specified that not everybody in the Wiccan and pagan and witch community is interested in experimentation or in math or in physics or anything like that. I do, however, have some friends who actually came out of more magical thinking because they, over the course of thinking that quantum shit was cool, actually came into a more scientific view of the world. That's neither here nor there, but there are so many people in the world right now, and I have to specify the Western world, who are able to experiment with their belief systems, but also their direct experiences enough to either go out and find the scientific explanation, which is what I think should be first and foremost, or to say, I had a religious experience. Let me go somewhere where I can discuss that with people. Okay, I accept that there are many, many issues that have been founded that are because people are going on fairy tales and they have never had a religious experience and they just like being in church. I accept
that religiosity. Like, but we study this and we look at like Christianity within I think the highest rates of Christianity are within accounting and physics. I think was the last stats I saw, and really low within other practices. And you can see those different breakdowns. Biology seems to have a particular strait of atheism. Now, I am going to look, correlation is not causation. I think that's really important with the comments about religious names. But at the same time, we seem to be able to track those things. And if people can still engage in the scientific method, I don't see why religion is a blocker to that. And unless you want to make the argument that countries that run on particularly fundamentalist belief structures are going to have a stranglehold. But I don't think
so. In the United States,
the world in the West.
Just a quick note on the
experimentation.
Okay, not everyone at once. Not everyone at once. Let's go to SDL. Let's go to Kilo. Let's go to Socrates. Go ahead.
Just a quick note on the survey data. The American public, something like 5% is atheists. The American scientific public, people with a BS or whatever, 50% are atheist or agnostic. It's like a 10 times increase. And my understanding is that biology and physics are actually the two lowest, and it's more the humanities and business majors which are the highest. Like the more applied sciences
That's
people
true.
are in,
I was talking like about science. I think biology.
I'm pretty sure, as a last
Maybe-
note, I'm pretty sure that a survey of PNAS, like one of the highest scientific offices in the country, so like 90% are atheists. There's a very tight correlation between applied sciences, higher education, and atheism.
Yes, they are. They're not mutually exclusive.
Again, doesn't mean
obviously.
causality.
Yeah, I think, and you can look at Pew Research indicating that people are becoming less religious over time, not claiming a specific denomination. No one refuted earlier when I suggested humanity is becoming more civilized over time. I think we're becoming more science oriented and coming up with answers for things we really didn't have the answers for. I know that's not all religion is, Johnny. I'm sorry. Beckett, I actually do think that an anti-theist or atheist stance is in and of itself a religious statement that is just as harmful to me. The Chinese government being officially an atheist nation is just as harmful to me as if they had declared for a particular denomination. So I do think that. My question is, and I don't know if any
Wait,
bridges.
SDL,
Wait,
do you agree with that?
Yeah, can I get in there? I'll say.
Yeah, because you made a statement.
Everyone's like,
Kilo,
hold
you made
the
it. No,
fuck
hold
up.
on,
I'm just
hold on,
like,
hold
I
on,
don't
hold
want
on,
to
hold on, hold
interrupt,
on,
but
hold on, please. I want to explain why I'm cutting you off, Kilo, because I don't mean to cut you off, but you made a point which bears digging into, right? And I
Sure.
really want to see where we stand on this. You stated that a state or an entity declaring itself anti-theist is just as harmful as, for example, if we declared for Islam or Christianity or
I
something like
actually
that.
agree with that.
And
I'll stand that position as well.
Is that
Atheists or
true?
anti-theists?
Anti-theist.
Anti-theist.
Because China
So,
does not let you
Scandinavia-
practice religion. You are not allowed.
That's not technically that's not true either. China has 5 allowed religions. They do face a lot of repression, but
They
you are
recognize 5 religions officially, but they are
it's-
officially designated an atheist nation.
Is
Like,
there
there are
anything
states,
else
like-
going on in China though besides like being kind of against religion? Like, are there other ideologies at work that could
Well, that's
have
another
some
question I want
explanatory
to
power
ask,
other
but
than atheism?
I'm saving that one for the last question of the night because I'm
Oh,
curious.
okay.
But
Sure.
we'll get into it. Maybe it'll come up.
Um,
But I'm curious
yeah.
what you and Socrates and
I'll-
SDL think about that
Yeah, I'll let you
statement.
guys go
right?
first.
I guess I would just say anti-theism is a much smaller belief for a state to adopt usually than a religious belief, but like the level of evil involved usually is how willing they are to impose that on people. Like I think states should be secular. I do not want states to impose any religious or lack thereof belief on people. But if anti-theism of the state just means something like we're going to tax churches 1% higher, that's like way less harmful than the vast majority of religious states in history.
Let's tackle the example we have in the real world, China. Right? Do you think that China and its anti-theistic practices is as harmful or at least comparable harm to something like Iran and their declaration for Islam?
I mean, pretty clearly no. Like Saudi Arabia executes and tortures people for like breaking morality police rules. So does Iran. Like I'm sure
does
China
this too.
I'm sure China does a lot of evil
Social's
things.
credit score go burr.
The rate of abuse is probably higher, though. I don't really care to defend authoritarian anti-theism. It's not like like the question of
Yeah,
is it as bad is sort of like an irrelevant question. It's all bad. I don't really care if it's 2 points bad.
Uyghurs
instead of
get
3.
thrown in like little
Yeah.
concentration
It's
camps and then don't come out.
exclusionary.
So.
Yeah.
It's exclusionary, and we already
established.
established that the exclusionary tendency is one of the main things that eventually over generations builds up to violence in religions. So if it's
Yeah.
exclusionary and it's
But
a
that-
government,
Yeah, I mean that's
not a fan of separate some of this stuff out.
And this is kind of the point with, because I agree with you. Like the question is, what's religion's place in the modern world? And we are taking this from a very Western perspective. I think states having secular positions that allow religion is obviously far more preferable than a state religion. I think for everyone involved, because then you've got like much more personal freedom. But like we have those other things that otherize and kind of have prescriptive elements of who we are, whether we're talking about like people's kind of nationalist identities or racial identities or creed identities. All those things are going to have similar otherizing effects. So I'd say I don't want to go down a slippery slope, but then if you'd apply that to religion, if you go, well, it otherizes people, it provides prescriptions of who you should be. does that mean that we should take exactly the same stance with other things? Like if you've got a community that is very insular culturally, like a minority community, and you're like, well, people can't access this, and also it's exclusionary to other groups. Do we then go in, like, as the government, and go, well, actually, we need to remove that? I don't think anyone here would want to see a world where no one's allowed to have kind of differing belief structures about who they are as a person.
Well, so generally, it's the inclusive religions that I worry about more. So religions that you can't convert into generally don't go out and start wars and try to convert lots of people. It's the ones that want to include everybody, which
recruitment is not something that is across all religions, and it is inherently part of all power structures.
Yeah. Hinduism is something you can't really convert into. You can't join the caste system, but it's still very aggressive, and we're still seeing like
I'm not saying it's like a perfect correlation, but
I don't know. I
Islam
think
and Christianity
I think this is selection bias. Most religions, when we're talking about Abrahamic faiths, are religions of conversion.
Well, not Judaism. That's one of the three.
That's true. But you can convert to
it's the first one. It's the original.
But you can convert to Judaism.
It's tough, but you can. But
it is
pretty hard.
We're not looking for
difficult.
Yeah,
we're not looking for
converts. You can do it, but at the same time, you've got other religions.
But it's absolutely not proselytizing.
You can't just enter into the system of anywhere near as easily. And the idea of, like, say, Shintoism is not to convert everyone to worship the fucking emperor. It's that is the religion of the country. So I think there are
it's to expand the empire.
Yeah. So there is, but at the same time, you've not got an element of conversion, which was your prescription of what it, and you've got some of the worst massacres in modern history.
I
would disagree with your assessment.
That's not the only problem, right? That's not the only problem. The other problem can be imperialism or colonialism, right? So, and we have plenty of examples of that happening too. As a
British person, I don't know what.
I mean, it's also like with Japan in particular. With Japan in particular, it's like ancestor worship. It's like Ubermensch ancestor worship, and so even though it's not inclusionary, it's still very much power structured oriented.
Yeah, which seems to be the origin of basically your religion as well. Like just to throw that out there, like the oldest religion in the world is like 60,000 years old. It's practiced by an Aboriginal tribe still on a reservation in Australia, and it is ancestor and animal worship. And also, we do have good anthropological evidence that religion seems to predate agriculture. So it is something that humanity's been doing an awfully long fucking time.
Or at least some kind of worship. Maybe not like an organized religion, but some kind of worship.
Well, on that note,
a temple that was built.
On that note, and since we are kind of running down on time here, and I do want to ask this question, because I'm curious what everyone's answer is. It's one of those things where I don't feel like I've ever gotten a satisfactory answer. That just might be my bias, to be clear, right? Like, so take that with a grain of salt. I cannot see any fundamental difference between an ideology and a religion, right? I don't know what the difference would be. Like, a religion doesn't even have to include God, for example, right? Like, you have religions without God. But they all seem to share just common indicators with ideology, and I cannot, for the life of me, distinguish the two. So maybe one of you on this great, wonderful, lovely panel can help elucidate this difference.
Can you give an example of something that you would just call an ideology?
Just call an ideology?
So like capitalism.
Capitalism is ideology.
Yeah.
Communism
capitalism,
is ideology.
communism.
Liberalism is an ideology. Man,
there are a set of precepts that we are setting our standards by and trying to reach because we believe they will reach certain outcomes.
Sure.
And that's true of religion as well. You do certain things, you end up in the good place. You do certain things, you end up in the bad place. If you're not communist enough, you're all going to die under capitalism.
Yeah.
You're not communist, you go to the bad place in Siberia.
But it's not rooted in anything metaphysical, or it's not rooted in anything metaphysical or supernatural. It's not rooted in the afterlife. It is rooted in what happens to society right here, right now. That is, it, and does have a scientific and an empirical foundation. I think that's the distinction between those two things.
So
yeah, like the fundamental
clear
definition...
what you're saying, just so I can clear what Kilo is saying. You say it's lacking any supernatural trappings and is simply based on
Anything's
the here and now.
Yeah, so if the prescription that it's offering, right? If you have to do this to attain this thing, or whatever, if either the medium or the end result, i.e., like heaven or the afterlife or whatever, is rooted in something immaterial, metaphysical, or not basically anything we can't substantiate in the
This
in the
but this
human
is
Oh,
really
experience.
so
Western
communism,
thinking.
Okay.
This is
basically.
hold on,
Okay,
hold
fair
on, just
enough. Let's
quickly.
go
This
on.
is a
Let's
really
continue.
Western. This is a
Well,
really
like the
Western.
communists
That
base
is
everything
theory.
in a
Hold on. Like
no.
when we're looking at like religions across the world, there are plenty of religions that we like. I had somebody earlier say to like the other day say to me that, well, Taoism isn't a religion, and it's like, yeah, but we view it in that way. It's part of the trifecta of traditional Chinese
It's
religion.
something that
Confucianism
is
gets counted in
metaphysical.
that
Well,
transfiction, but like it's not got end precepts in the same way we think about it in the Western style. That's
Okay.
that's
I
just
have a
how
really
we're
simple answer
culturally
for you, Wick.
conditioned.
Well, sure, but again, we can think of this
Mm.
as a sort of that spectrum of religion. Christianity is very strongly interested in state control. It has very strong prescriptions. The fact that some religions, which still involve the metaphysical, involve less prescriptions or less of the metaphysical, does not mean they are not religious. We would not call like a deist a non-religious person, even though they have very, very, very few religious beliefs, very, very, very few prescriptions that follow from that, I don't think.
Speaking
So
as a deist, I'd agree with
the
you.
main difference between an ideology, which is generally something that is associated with the social structures, with ethics, all that shit. The main difference between an ideology and a religion, I think, that lies right there in the middle, and it's neither, is, or it could be a religion if you treated it like that. But I think the main difference is transcendental philosophy. When Kant is talking about the thing of itself, when you have certain people, I think Wittgenstein is one, I know Kurt Gödel is one, people who believe in the intellectual realm of Platonic ideals. Transcendental means beyond the physical, and so when Thomas Aquinas is talking about the unmoved mover, he's talking about something that is transcendental because it lies outside of our physical universe. Transcendental philosophy, when people try to logically talk about that kind of thing, is where you cross over from just having virtue and ethic, I think.
So, to jump in with a slightly different definition than everybody else, I actually nest these. So I would say that religions are a type of ideology versus something like capitalism is a political ideology. So an ideology, in my viewpoint, is something about the way that you view the world. So everybody sees the world, sees things, sees events in the world, sees different groups of people, but the way that fits into your overall perspective is your ideology. So there's this quote I'll always remember from C.S. Lewis, who's religious, who says, "I believe in God as I believe in the sun, not just because I see it, but because through it I see all other things." And so it's the lens through which you see everything else. I would say that religions are examples. They're a spiritual ideology. So a religion takes religious experiences, which are something that you feel, some community, and it puts some framework, some lens onto it that sees it in this particular way. Because, something like, okay, going from, Judaism to Christianity, the different lens of saying this is one religion versus another, when it's like dudes in the desert, like fasting for like days at a time, so you could look at that and you could say, oh, maybe this is like a Hindu guy, maybe this is a Jewish guy, maybe this is a Christian guy, but that framework that you put over it, the way you see all of it, that's ideological. So I would say my argument is they're nested, or religion is nested into ideology.
SDL, give it a crack.
I mean, I would generally take the same view as it's a nested. Religion is a type of ideology. Usually, there are some types of like people who are spiritual but not religious. Generally, don't or may lack an ideological view of the world, they tend to like when sociologically, when we investigate people who are spiritual but not religious, they don't go to church usually. They're really into like religious apps is one of the big things we've seen rising actually. Like people find a faith that is internally focused rather than based on a interpretation of the world usually. So the only thing I'd note is there are some religions which are not ideologies, but any religion which tends to be an organized one, which has like a faith, which has a god, tends to be an ideological view of the world. The big distinction is it has those mystical elements as part of it. And the argument against that, of course, is that like all ideologies can be bad. It's a question of what they're grounded on. The argument from my perspective, why I do not like religious ideologies is because they are grounded on something which is not true and which leads people to bad outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I was suggesting.
I don't know
Well
if
said.
this helps me
That's
at
good.
all, right? I'll grapple with it.
I-
I will wrestle with
give you-
these ideas.
I will
because
give
you-
you
Okay,
give you
please.
a state answer. Tax exemption is what differentiates religion.
Fuck
And
off.
that is
Noted.
that's the actual, that is
Yeah.
generally how we differentiate between cults, ideologies, and religion. It's tax exemption. I'd also say, like, you know, we're talking about truth is okay, like really convenient to do in the stage of religion, but I don't know if we do that. Like, we don't go, okay, cool. Well, looking at all the precepts of communism, for
Right,
example,
though.
it seems that it fundamentally runs against
If-
like how humans work. So is communism true? Is it even achievable? I don't know if we do that with other things. I don't know whether we
So-
do it like with
I
other
wonder.
ideological
So I would say
bases.
that as an ideology, you don't look to see is it true or not. It's a way that you see everything else. So
Why is that true of religion, though? Why would you? Why
Why?
is that a criticism of religion if you're not
I
holding?
I
The
would
same
say it's an
standard for
unfair
ideology?
criticism of religion. This is like
Okay.
one of the big departures I have with Sam Harris, where he's like, oh, you know, religion can get you to do all these kind of crazy things. Meanwhile, we're in secular wars and we're torturing people and doing all these things for, you know, neoliberalism or capitalism because markets have to go burr. And if they don't, you know, we can sacrifice any number of people to the Wall Street volcano to make
It's fine to charge
to make
$1,000
capital
for
flow.
insulin because that's how capitalism works.
Yeah.
Even if it's monstrous.
Capital's got to flow, baby.
I'm still
No
stuck
matter
on
if we all
this-
die for it.
I'm
it's
still
gotta
stuck
flow.
on this tax exemption thing because honestly, I've been thinking. Right?
Wick's just thinking like, how do I get this channel to be
this is a real thing
recognized?
because one of the things is I've been like looking at in the modern religion lens. This is kind of a silly pet theory, but I'm wondering if streamers are the new like the neo preachers, right? Because think about it. Think about how we
Let me
interact
stay at your
with our
house in Las
audiences.
Vegas, guys. Let me stay in your house as I wear this hoodie that makes me look
We're-
like I'm wearing
we're-
monk
I don't know.
robes.
I have
what
a-
I do-
Maybe streamers
just
are
real
starting
quick,
religions.
I
I think Wick is sus.
I sit here.
think Wick is
I tell you
fucking
what I
sus.
think. I preach to
Yeah.
you what my ideas are. I preach to you my beliefs. We have experiences together, right?
You even
You
have a
chat
uniform.
on the panel.
You wear the
person
same
And
who-
then
thing every
I
stream.
pass that plate around. And gang, I'm passing that hat around right now.
Yeah.
I'm taking my hat off, right? I'm passing around. Say, put some money. Do you want to be as cool as Lex Friedman is and support my channel? You can super chat right now and do that. If you want to throw some bits my way, throw some subs my way on Twitch or Kick, you can do that. And gang, I can't promise you eternal life, but I can promise you that I will feel a warm, glowing sensation within my chest for every dollar you spend.
Aw.
And the more dollars you spend, the stronger that sensation will be. I promise and I guarantee that thing. I can't
When
promise
you-
you eternal life, but I can promise you right now, okay?
When you start off a sentence with "I can't promise you eternal life," I get shivers down my spine, dude. I hate it so much. It's so
Like,
creepy.
no, Wick promised them eternal life.
Yeah.
Listen, they're living eternally through the video of like you
Yeah,
thanking
it's
them for
true.
the super
That's
chat.
true.
That's a form of immortality.
That's true.
Wow.
Okay.
Um,
I know we have places to be, things to do. I don't want to keep everyone too much longer, but I want to give everyone a chance to have closing thoughts and closing statements. Gang, this will be my last stream of the week. Come hell or high water, I will make it to TwitchCon, right? We are going to TwitchCon, whether I have a place to stay or not. We're going to go there. So I might be on live streams with some people, right? Some people have reached out to collab. Keffels have reached out to collab with me, maybe a few others. And so we'll see how that goes. But as of now, gang, please give your attention to our lovely guests who will get a chance to shout themselves out, tell people their closing thoughts on the subject, and then yeah, close us out. And we're going to start in the reverse order we started. And we're going to go with Socrates first. Go ahead, Socrates. And thank you for the bits, by the way, Better Method.
Yeah, so I think with any good religious conversation, we're kind of all over the place, at each other's throats at times. I think that's how you know that it was successful. I think there was a little bit of agreement that religion is an ideology, like other ideologies. There's human experiences that we can have, but how we perceive those can be very different. I would contend that in America, religion is one of these things that's both kind of like blamed for too many and too few things, because we have a sadistic, magical thinking, conservative right, clutching a Bible wrapped in a flag, trying to bring fascism into our country that has, I wouldn't consider it kind of legitimate, non-heretical Christian teachings, but that is the language that they speak, and there are a lot of true believers in the sense that they're truly motivated by these beliefs. It's not just an excuse, or it's not just the way they talk about it. They really do feel this way strongly, and at the same time, there's so many other things in the world that motivate people that are ideological that are not religious, and it's important not to assume that religion is the only explanation when sometimes it's geopolitics or capitalism or communism or what have you. So thanks for having me on. If anybody wants to chat a little bit more about this, I'd be down right after the stream.
Sure. Where can people find you if they want to do that?
Oh yeah, you can find me at Twitch, Socrates TV, and on Twitter at Real Socrates. Yeah.
Check him out, gang. Thanks again for coming. Really appreciate you, buddy. SDL.
Thank you.
So we started the question with what is religion and what's the argument against it, at least for me. And I think the argument given here is that it is a type of ideology which is based on metaphysical beliefs of some kind. And the argument that I've tried to raise throughout this conversation is that that leads people not towards truth in general, but towards beliefs which either happen to be true, but for no good reason, it's not a justified belief, or beliefs which are actively false and often harmful. The obvious example of the harm can be seen in something like the Republican Party, and it's like steadfast support for like basically all the crazy things that evangelical Christians want. That's why there's book burnings, why there's book bans, because of the Republican Party. There would be a lot of evil in this world without religion. I don't want to deny that at all. Religion is just one of many ideologies, and everyone who has one ideology often has a dozen more. But the argument from my perspective is that we should want to minimize the number of ideologies that are based on weak evidence that lead people towards false beliefs, and that the world would be better as more people become more secular, as more people become deistic or like spiritual, but non-religious. And I would like to see a world where most people are atheists in some way or another.
Where can people find you?
They can find me at sockdoneleft.org/live, where I'm streaming right now.
Beautiful, gang. Check them out. Thank you for coming. I really appreciate your perspective on this, and hope you enjoyed the chat. Next up, Kilo.
Yeah. So interesting conversation. I appreciated everybody's input. You guys moved the needle not at all for me. I'm exactly the same way as I came into this conversation. None of you are convincing whatsoever. No, SDL, I agree with a lot of what he had to say. I do think that what I think would be the biggest benefit, the most positive trend for society to undertake would be sort of a adjustment to our social or communal stigma associated with religion, where it's more of a prerogative. It's not as like we have politicians modern day in America, even though our Constitution codifies a separation of church and state. We do have politicians that still run on the platform of Christianity and legislate accordingly. I think that's disgusting. And I do think that in many ways we would stand to see a lot of benefit from progressing more towards a secular or a individual spiritual encouragement of the practice of religion. You can find me at Kilo the Giant on Twitch and Twitter. And I mostly talk about like sociological stuff, cultural stuff, things like this, what have you. I'm only live like once every month or something like that. I'm not live very often, but it was a pleasure. Johnny, Becca, good to see both. Again, SDL, Socrates, good to meet you.
Yeah, good to meet you.
Yeah. Thank
Gang,
you.
Hell yeah.
check him out. He's great. $10 from Mantis. Sorry about the exchange rate. It's New Zealand dollars. I don't know how much it is. Thanks for the panel. You're welcome for the panel. $2 from Testicle Johnson to say panel thoughts on the practice of 𝕾𝖍𝖎𝖙𝖘𝖍𝖔𝖜. I don't know how to spell it. I don't know how. I don't know what that is. But great, awesome. And we're going to toss it to Johnny Scarlet. Go ahead.
Okay. I definitely didn't want to come and try and elaborate on personal experiences and try and convince anybody that God is real. I hope that nobody thought that I was here to proselytize on something that I don't think can be proven. But I do think that we established, especially through methods of like discussing how older religions are formed and ideologies, I think we now have a better idea, and I have a better idea of how religions can and should evolve as spiritual practices. One of them mainly being that I think that you should experience something before you go looking for other people to talk about it. And, I started Twitch a few years ago, and it was before the politics tag was a thing, but we were all doing politics, and eventually over time, my stream, which is twitch.tv/Johnny Scarlet, evolved into a place where we just kind of talk about anything that is researchable. So science and math and philosophy and religion. What's really cool about that is that I've actually had people tell me that on the preacher thing, that my stream is like a place for people to come and have not only logical and intellectual, but also at times very emotional discussions about how these things work, but also how they affect their lives. And I'm really proud of that. And if you want to come by, we would love to have you. Okay.
Well, great. Check them out. They are great, honestly. Love to have them on my stream. I really appreciate you coming. Last, but well, maybe the least, he's British. Beckett, go ahead.
Thank you, Wick, as always. Faith is to believe what you do not see. The reward of this faith is to see what you believe. As said by Saint Augustine. There we go. Got another one in. Nice and easy. Right, okay. This has been fun.
This is why I say he's the least, but go on.
I try. No, this has been fun. I think religion definitely has a place in modern society. I think it is dangerous to have any fundamental kind of ideology running any nation. I'm a liberal. I believe in freedom of thought, freedom of speech, and freedom to advance. I think religion still has a place in kind of helping people build their cultural and creed and ideological viewpoints. But yeah, we should be very cynical of religions that are going to kind of just draw divisive lines. And I think that's something that as the world becomes more complex in the next sort of 50 years, because we're sort of maybe seeing an end to kind of the way America was in the 1950s, where it's a very strong sort of based system that kind of spread across the Western world post World War II. I think that's going to be a struggle for all of us. Ultimately, yeah, I've just enjoyed it. I'm really happy to keep this conversation going, Socrates, if you want to keep talking afterwards, and anyone else. Beckett of Crabs, I swear to my community, I will stop doing this. I mostly talk about furries, internet lore and history, lol cows, and all kinds of crazy things. So I have moved swiftly away from politics, and please stop DMing me about it, guys. I will get back to some normal content for me. This has been really fun. If people want to do something completely different, come check me out.
A fellow Christorian.
Bits and bobs of Christorian stuff.
Okay.
I think we're mostly looking at King Cobra at the moment. That's our current one we're doing.
Okay.
It's so good. It's so good.
Gang, it's been great. So what's coming up on my channel? Well, we're gonna be live streaming. Maybe not on this channel, but you'll check me out. Keep an eye out on my Discord. Exclamation point Discord. I'll put the link in the YouTube chat as well. You click on that link, you accept the rules, and I will be providing updates throughout the weekend of where you can find me live. And we will be doing some live on scene with some very big players, right? And you'll be able to see me for more than just this up, right? You can see the rest of me. Great. Crazy, huh? So check us out there. Let me get that link for you. And who we rating out to? Are any of you still streaming after this?
Beckett's still
I'll be
live. I just
streaming.
rated that to him.
Beckett's live.
Beckett, yeah.
Beckett it is then.
Sorry.
Guess
sorry,
if we
Teresa.
must. There we go. But yes, don't forget, !board Discord, click the link, join our community.
Thank
Thank
you,
you, Wick.
Thank you.
Good
Wick.
luck with TwitchCon too, man. I hope you figure something out.
Wave your
Yeah.
bye-bye. But thank you for the well wishes.
Are we saying goodbye to the
Keep
king? What's
waving.
happening?
Keep waving. We're not done rating. Wait, don't stop.
Those are not spirit fingers.
Okay,
my
I'll see you.
God.
Jeez.
Okay, thank you.